Welcome back to the North Yorkshire podcast. We've taken a bit of a hiatus, but we're back, and we are back celebrating Black History Month. This episode we're joined with a social worker from North Yorkshire, and we're going to be discussing Mental Health Awareness Day, which is today, in combination with Black History Month as well. So first off, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful to you, Alice, for sharing your story with us. I just want to give a brief overview of Mental Health Awareness Day. According to Mind, 1 in 4 people experience mental health issues each year, and 23% of Black or Black British people will experience a common mental health problem in any given week. This compares to 17% of White British people. So with that, Alice, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Alice, and I'm Alice, and I work in North Yorkshire as an adult social worker. I go by 2 names, so I'm Alice, aka Bernie, which Bernie is my family name, and I use people who I'm very close to will refer to me as Bernie, because that stems back from my childhood. So I'm one of 4 children, so it was always Bernie then, because I'm the eldest child.
So my first question for you is, why is it important for you to share your story today with everyone?
I think for me, I grew up in the 80s, so as I said, I grew up in the 80s, and when I was growing up, even still today, that mental health issues around mental health in the Black, Asian and wider ethnic minority groups, it's just not spoken about. It's seen as an embarrassment to even to be perceived that you've got mental health problems. I'm going to change that word, not problems, difficulties, and that they're being displayed out, that you are having to seek support for that. And in my particular situation, where I'm mixed race, I was always different from the moment I was born. I was born in the West Indies, like I've said, I think on a previous podcast. So there was always times when I was standing out, and I feel, mental health applies to everybody. It doesn't just apply for people living in the Black Asian community. I think anybody who's experienced episodes of a decline in their emotional health can identify with each other. You don't have to live the same experience, but I do feel that you can definitely identify.
Thank you. And it's just, thank you so much for, being vulnerable and sharing this with us. It's really valuable, I think, when you see people, sharing experiences. It can really help a lot of people. This episode sees the intersection of Mental Health Awareness Day as well as Black History Month. So I wondered, Alice, if you could describe for me the way that your mental health has intersected with your identity and experiences as a Black woman, or more generally, what you think about the correlation between mental health and Blackness.
In all honesty, I think it starts, mental health is very unique, very personalised to the individual, the environment that they grew up in, the parents, the parents that they have, and if they have parents, if they don't, and that extended family or support network. In my particular situation, I was always, for whatever reason, I stood out. So I identify as a black woman. However, I made that choice. So when I was growing up in the 80s, I stood out for being mixed race. Different terms were used back then, which I won't use because I don't think they're politically correct anymore. And there was always that feeling of detachment from within my own household, because as the eldest child, female child, my mum is Black Caribbean and my dad is English. Born in Otley. He died quite a few years ago. they were unique as a couple in themselves because of the large age difference. So, and with my mum not being able to read all right, there was a lot of expectations on me as a child. So you go then from being in the house, and then you go to school. So you're going to school. I'm the tallest. I've got an afro. And there's a few distinct memories I've got where my dad's picking me up, and people are asking if he's my granddad.
Really?
And then I had moments as well where people used to say, which wall, we're children, we all talk silliness, don't we, when we're children. You'd be playing in the playground, and it would be, if there was a war, would you fight for, which side would you fight on? Would you fight on the black side or the English side and stuff? And I remember that from primary school. So, and then it talked about intersection as well. I had that experience of not being allowed to. I always had to ask permission, so I wasn't allowed to go out and play. And my mum was, well, she still is. She's in the West Indian community. Church is heavily featured, very heavily featured in terms of decision making and how, so there was that, and then you've got the intersection of poverty. I think I've started sharing a bit more that I didn't have birthdays and parties. I didn't have birthday presents. If there was food in the house, that was a good day. If there wasn't, and then there was alcoholism, and then there was violence. So there was a lot of reasons why I felt detached, and perceived myself to be inferior, because it was hard growing up in the 80s. I can honestly say that. It was, and then going through school was, I was very good at sport in school. So that then some of the stuff with dyslexia, I didn't find out until after, until after I didn't do very well at school. So there was a lot of things that was bubbling, and then so it was that feeling of detachment and feeling inferior, and having to prove myself, or having in the household expectations that were beyond my age.
And it all accumulates together, doesn't it?
Yeah, because you're trying. So, phoning the police when there was violence, being. My mum used to send me over to the neighbours, if they to borrow sugar, or so we're talking in those days where you went across the road. Because I'm not Jamaican, a lot of the people, I was brought up in Canterbury, in Bradford, which is so you've even got that. I was brought up in Canterbury Estate, which was seen back then as a very poverty. It wasn't a desired area, so. You sort of you're growing up seem to apologise for everything, So I think that's what I link with mental health, that attachment, inferior, and used to seem to, apologising, or, sorry to trouble you. My mum sent me around, and being expected to come with an answer in that sort of environment, So. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, in that you've sort of mentioned a couple of things which I'd just like to, pick up on a little bit, because I imagine that they've probably had, quite an impact on your mental well-being, like as a child, and how you felt. But you mentioned that you grew up in poverty. You mentioned, being in a household with alcoholism and domestic abuse, and then you have shared with me that you spent some time in the care system. I just wondered whether or not you'd be able to tell us a little about how this experience has impacted on you and on your mental health.
When I was living at home, and even right up until I left home and living, you just got on with it. You literally, you got on with it. And one of the things that I remember so much is wishing how things could be different. And I think that's where high expectations, if I link Christianity and that upbringing around Christianity and stuff, wishing that I spent so much time wishing, because if you're good, you're going to be rewarded with a miracle. Yeah, and that was, and it was very much about trying to, and say, like, for example, I would wish and think, well, I haven't wished hard enough, so I can't, so that formed a lot in terms of good and bad in terms of work ethic.
So did you you've mentioned athletics a couple of times. Was that sort of like a safe space for you, or like a place where you channeled these feelings? Like, did that help with your mental health during that time, do you think?
So my parents, it was a very split. I got into athletics after I left the house. I was very good at school, but my parents, my mum was really adverse to me going in athletics, because she felt like, they only wanted me because they were only pushing. My mum was very, very, well, what about your education? And the Asian community, even the Black and Asian community, are very keen on education, extremely keen on education. Education.
I know.
That seems like, so that was when, as I said, after I left the house, so that was very much took off after I left the house, because I didn't fit. I met a random person, and having high expectations, it was a dry. Well, I knew what standard I was working to, so I was able to set targets, push myself, and so where I achieved. I was in the British Olympic trials, and like, to have the opportunity to train with my heroes. So
Incredible.
I went out to Kenya, and even then, in Kenya I wasn't black, I was white.
Isn't it funny how that happens? It's crazy, isn't it? You can spend your whole life thinking of yourself as one identity, and you go to another country and you're suddenly white, or
So I mean, and with sports and stuff, it's not about the achievements that stand out the most to me. It's that baseline. Let's go back to basics. Let's assess. Don't expect things straight away. My body's not a machine. Look at what's having an impact in terms of, like, the triggers, and that is some. So when did I? So I was highly competitive in athletics, where I was ranked in the top 15 in the country. I was 11th in the country at one point for the 800, getting invited to attend races. As I said, meeting Sebastian Coe, running with Diane, so being invited to run with Diane Liddell, Kelly Holmes, in one race. And the reason why I mentioned Kelly Holmes, I was so nervous, so nervous, where I didn't manage my feelings very well of anxiety at all.
Oh, really?
Not at all. I was nervous from the moment I heard I got asked to.
Was that because she was a hero, and that's why you were so nervous about it? Or
I never expect. I think, when you've got low expectations of yourself. I mean, like, my core belief, and I've had to really work on that, and I'm still working on that. I felt so. I mean, you've got something called imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I actually felt I didn't deserve to be here. I'm going to mess it up. My coach is going to be disappointed. I was more worried actually about disappointing my coach, who had invested his time and effort into me, than actually being in the race.
Yeah. And I guess as well, if you've had, I don't know, you mentioned that your mum didn't necessarily take your sporting achievements seriously compared to, like, your school achievements, but I guess to then find out you're in a race with Kelly Holmes, like, that is very much confirming your value as, like, an athlete and your progress.
It's like anything, isn't it? You're sitting watching TV, and I just did it randomly. I was at a stage in my life where my mental health was low. I'd been backpacking, and I felt I just had, during that time of backpacking, I found out I was dyslexic in Bradford, and that feeling of embarrassment that, you know, what do I do? I can't tell my mum this, there's no way, but, you know, and so I got, you know, very low pay, you know, jobs that I could get, and I saved up, and for quite a while I went backpacking, where, you know, where I put myself in dangerous situations, like, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. If it works out, it works out.
If it doesn't, we'll cross that bridge.
Yeah, one thing I can do, I can talk. So I've got the gift of the gab, and that was, you know, where I spent, you know, time. One of the lowest points was in America, where I had no money. I slept on an airport floor. You know, I literally didn't know what to do, and those choices, you know, I was just really, I was reinforcing what I perceived of myself. So to come back and think, to come back, that was one of the hardest things to do, because I was coming back to the house, you know, well, you know, to my own house, where once again you're going back to that environment. Well, you're of a certain age, such and such down the road. Well, she's got a job, she's got this, she's married. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then everyone's asking.
Yeah. So you got no boyfriend yet? What do you mean you got no boyfriend yet? You know, and yeah, you can. So it took a lot of strength more strength to return back home. With mental health, it's being able to not be hard on yourself. You know, there's been moments when I've, you know, been so hard on myself that, you know, I just want to escape, and, you know, and that, I think, yeah, you know, people talk about black fatigue and stuff. You see that, I really do, you know, that is not just a book to talk about the expectations of you in society. I mean, for anybody, sometimes it is really, you know, I've been to the where the strength just to get out of bed it's been an achievement, and I've been able to do that because at different stages of my life I've been fortunate enough to access support, to access talk therapy, where I've been able to look at my strategies, like in sports, look at my thinking processes, look at what's working well for me and what is going against me, and stuff, and, you know, not trying to really break down this concept of, you know, wishing, you know, because if I wish hard enough. So for me, the therapies that I've accessed through different stages of my life have been, and I would encourage, because, and this is why, going back to your first question, why it's so important that, you know, I don't think anybody should feel embarrassed about being themselves or having periods where the mental health has dipped. You know, well, you know yourself, in the Asian and Black community, it's you know, it's really hard, you know, because how do you disrespect, you know, you taught to respect your elders, that is very much featured. So how do you, you know, and seeking support is a sign of weakness. So how do you go against that?
There's such a stigma, though, I think, in like the Black and Asian communities. There's such a stigma around mental health, and, you know, there's, you know, does that question, does mental health like exist? I think, you know, in so many of those communities, it is not recognised as an illness, and so if your community and your family don't recognise it, then, you know, how do you get the support that you need? And, you know, it sounds like you were, you know, you had those networks, and you were able to get therapy, and you were able to, you know, go to the doctors, but, you know, it is without having your community support that can make things even more challenging, can't it?
Yeah, I think I've been listening to, I've been revisiting poems, and I've been revisiting Maya Angelou. Yeah, look, and she writes a poem about women's work. And there's other things with that. It is so hard, because especially when you're living in poverty, especially when there's, if we just focus on poverty, domestic, that intersection, poverty, domestic violence and stuff. So it's hour by hour, the situation in the house can change very rapidly.
Yeah.
So, you know, the poem Women's Work, she talks about, well, I've got this to do, I've got the cleaning to do, and, you know, there's so many other things taking priority to distract away from just tuning in. I think that's a nice way of saying it, just tuning into yourself.
It's not, mental health doesn't choose a particular type of person or a particular background. Like, it can affect anyone, and it's very, very real. But I just think it's really, you know, it's been really inspiring to listen to you share your story. And I do have a final question for you, because I know you've got 2 daughters, and you've just shared, you know, the sort of the ways that you've got help around your mental health, be that through therapy or through exercise, or, you know, going traveling and getting those diagnoses for dyslexia, which I know I also had a diagnosis for dyslexia later on in life. And, you know, it is just, it changes, it completely changes things, and you sort of think back and you're like, no wonder I was struggling. But yeah, like, that's also so much great advice. But I just wondered if you have any words of advice or wisdom for your 2 daughters, or any other young women or women in general who may be struggling with their mental health. Yeah.
I think working backwards, don't apologise. I think that has been, if my 2 daughters were either 17 and they're 18, I have spent my whole life apologising, especially when my oldest, she's recently gone off to uni. And what I thought, I've worked backwards. What is the relationship that I'm wanting with my daughter as she's like transitioning into adulthood and stuff? And it's just going at her pace. So there's a.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much for sharing. And I hope that you all enjoyed this first episode of the podcast. We do have some more coming up on various topics. If anyone ever wants to, you know, is particularly inclined to come on and share anything, just you can send me an email and we can jump on a call like this and share it with everyone.